Hey folks, today I'll be going over another game submitted to our Patreon page, and this game was submitted by KirkD. This was a classical game, 45 plus 45, played on Lichess. Both players rated here around 1660, 1700 range. And in this game, we see Kirk getting a winning position pretty much early on in the middle game, but failing to actually win and convert the game in the end. Kirk misses a number of chances, and my feeling was that Black here was basically just lacking either a little bit of confidence or perhaps a little bit of aggression in order to finish this game off and finally win it, which is probably something that many players struggle with. So yeah, let's get into the game. So in this game, we see a Ruy Lopez, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, and knight takes e4. And so Kirk has been playing the Open Spanish for a little while now, according to his notes. And here white goes d4. And this is definitely a very playable system for Black, although optically it does look very scary to take on e4 with the king still castled on e8. But generally, Black is able to survive white's onslaught and reach a perfectly acceptable middle game. Nowadays, the main move here for Black is to play b5, first kicking back this bishop and then playing d5 to support the knight on e4. But in this game, Kirk plays e takes d4, which I normally don't care too much about the theory, but I will say that this move is objectively extremely risky if white knows what they're doing. Now in the game, white goes knight takes d4, which is actually not dangerous for Black at all. But the real issue with this move is the move rook to e1. First hitting the knight on e4, Black plays d5 to defend the knight, and now white takes on d4, now that there's actually a pin on this diagonal and there's a threat of knight takes c6. So this position is quite shaky for Black, which is why I wouldn't recommend one to repeat this opening, and instead I would suggest the typical b5 and d5 that Black is usually playing, where you support the knight on e4, you give back the pawn, but you get all your pieces out. Because after e takes d4, rook e1, d5, and knight takes d4, this is indeed pretty dangerous, and I would be careful about entering this position. In any case, in the game we get knight takes d4, Black trades on d4, queen takes d4, drops back knight f6, and now white does get a little bit of an initiative here with bishop to g5. Black is up a pawn, but white has a nice lead in development, but doesn't really end up getting enough for it. Here white plays bishop takes f6, which I think is definitely a questionable choice. White's point is that after bishop takes f6, they do get rook to e1 check, but after king to f8, sure, the king had to move here, but Black is still up a pawn, and perhaps even more importantly, white has given up the dark squared bishop, which means Black's dark squared bishop is now unopposed, and this bishop is just a fantastic piece. It's an excellent defender, and actually I think Black's king here is going to be perfectly safe, especially considering that a couple of minor pieces have already been traded off. So instead of bishop takes f6, I think white should just try to continue developing. Knight c3, rook e1, rook d1, bishop b3, and white will keep some initiative and some play. But yeah, this was definitely not the way to go. So rook e1 check, king f8, white throws in queen b4, bishop e7, queen f4. And I like how Black plays this part of the game, g6, bishop b3, bishop f6 covering the mate, knight to c3, king to g7. And here white plays queen to f3. Definitely a slow move, maybe with the intention of defending the knight on c3 in case Black was to take this one. I'm not really sure, but white needed to be a lot more faster here because white is down a pawn and white needed to really just get the initiative going with something like rook to e3, and then the game would definitely be pretty complicated. After queen f3, Black takes the opportunity to play the move c6. Very nice, very strong move. It feels a little bit slow, like Black is not developing, but next move Black is going to play d5, open up the bishop on c8, and also shut down the bishop on b3, and also restrict the knight on c3 as well. So it takes an extra move to get this in, but since white has also been a little bit slow with their initiative, as it turns out, Black has time for this one and is completely taking over the center. So white goes a knight to e4, now d5, and yeah, Black is more than happy to have white exchange on f6, and if we get this endgame, well then Black is just a clean pawn up and doing really, really well. So instead white goes rook a d1. And according to Kirk's notes, he spent more than 9 minutes here to calculate some possibilities. And that's good because it's definitely a critical moment. And right away, tactically, we notice that d takes e4 is very, very tempting. And after all is said and done, Kirk unfortunately rejects the e4 and plays the move bishop to f5. Not liking that after d takes e4, rook takes d8, e takes f3, rook takes h8, king takes, white would get rook e8 check, king to g7, and although black is a piece up, Kirk didn't like the pin along the back rank. And so this was kind of an unfortunate miss because, of course, once we reach this position and we take a look around, we see that this pin is a little bit annoying, but it's certainly not going to be changing the outcome of the game. All black needs to do is simply unpin with b5 and bishop b7 or b6 and bishop b7, and that's it. White is just going to be down a piece for nothing, no compensation whatsoever. So we end up stopping a little bit short here, and I'm sure a lot of players do this when you see a line that might be working and looks good, but you're not quite sure, might be some danger to the king or some pin that's uncomfortable, and we end up avoiding a line that's actually very, very strong. I think that was kind of the case here because, yeah, really nothing to fear for black in this moment. Black is just a piece up, needs to make 1 or 2 more accurate moves, and that's it. White's initiative totally extinguished. So this was maybe black's first miss of the game after rook a d1. Instead, we play bishop f5, which definitely keeps a big advantage, but I think d takes e4, that was lights out. Now white plays queen to f4, bishop takes e4, rook takes e4, and rook e8. So continuing to play solid, we're trying to exchange pieces, and indeed, this is normally what we're taught, like when you're up a pawn, up material, you want to trade everything off. But again, not really going for the most ambitious options. Actually, once again, it was totally fine, I think, to take on e4 and give up the queen. Now here we're not trading queens and going into the endgame with a piece up. Here black is giving up the queen for 2 rooks. I think a lot of players shy away from this exchange, but I just want to point it out that having 2 rooks against the queen, the really solid position, solid structure, very few weaknesses, safe king, the 2 rooks are generally going to be much stronger than the queen and just totally outplay it. And I think black is just completely winning here. Of course, we have the back rank mate threat, but then we just want to follow up with rook e8, maybe e3 somewhere, and the rooks are just going to completely outplay the queen here. As long as black keeps f7 defended, there's really no counterplay that white can hope for, and black should have a decisive advantage. Now, a lot of players don't really like to play against the queen, but I would say this is something that is important to try and get used to because sometimes you simply have to give up your queen for multiple pieces and be willing to play that position if it's favorable. And here I think black just has a great version of the 2 rooks versus queen position. So this was one option that I think would have given black a winning position. Another one was just a very simple but somewhat greedy move, bishop takes b2. And I'm not sure if this is a move Kirk really considered. A lot of players don't like to grab material if it's not really necessary. But here black is able to just take a second pawn. White has no threats in the position. The bishop can just immediately come back to f6. And then black has 2 pawns up and yeah, big advantage. Definitely better than just having 1 pawn extra. So instead we see rook e8, which is a solid choice, but again, not fighting for the biggest possible advantage. White trades, queen takes, c3, queen e7. Here black just continues improving the position. And I think when we have this phase of the game, just like improving the position, everything is going very smoothly, but it's when we have to find, let's say, that forcing knockout or making that decisive move to really change the game in your favor. This is where we really have to step it up and try to be a little bit more braver and more assertive. So queen e4, looking to trade queens. I'm not sure if this is what black really should be doing in the position. I think a move like queen e2 here might be more natural, looking to actually keep more pieces on the board and keep black's pieces very active, maybe even looking for a transfer of the bishop via d8 to b6 and putting pressure on f2. But queen e4, black keeps a very big advantage here, even in the endgame. Despite the presence of opposite color bishops, since there's rooks on the board, black is of course keeping great winning chances here. And I think, yeah, black has very good chances to win the game, really help the extra pawn, more active rook, and very solid structure. So black can just slowly grind this one. Definitely not a guaranteed win, but certainly good chances. Instead, white avoids the endgame with queen to c1, which I think was not right. White should definitely go for the endgame and try to survive there. Black plays h6, which definitely improves the position. I think, again, black could be more aggressive here. Just immediate d4 looked very, very strong to me. After takes, bishop takes d4, the plan is to just anchor this bishop with c5, and then this bishop on d4 is just an absolute monster. And from here, we can see the main advantage of attacking with opposite color bishops. We're able to just put pressure on this dark squared weakness, and white's bishop is, of course, never going to be able to defend it or contest our bishop in any way. So here black just plays c5, maybe pushes b5, maybe even c4 somewhere, dominates the e file, maybe h5, h4 as well. You can definitely throw this one in and just put more pressure on white's king side. And yeah, I think it's pretty much just a hopeless position for white. Eventually, something will crack in white's position, because just white is just way too passive here. So h6 is fine, though, definitely not spoiling anything. Queen to d1. Now black plays d4, and better late than never, but here white does have the chance now to play bishop to c2. Earlier with the queen on c1, this could have been met with just d3, and this really wouldn't make a lot of sense. But now with bishop c2, white is able to mess with black's coordination. So queen e2, c takes d4. Black gets the queens off the board. It takes rook takes d1, and now rook to d8. Now, yeah, definitely call this move a mistake, because we had the much more active option, rook e2, available here, and I think this would have been a lot stronger. Now, this move is not necessarily easy to play. White can definitely get some counterplay here, but let me just show an instructive line as to how this endgame could play out. Let's say white goes bishop to b3, black takes rook takes b2, and now white plays d5. So black really wouldn't want to trade on d5, because then after rook takes d5, for example, white is getting rook to d7. White is still a pawn down, but is about to get very, very active here, right? With the rook attacking b7 and f7 and having a lot of counterplay. And white's bishop on b3, pawn on a2, very, very secure here. So this would be something that black wants to avoid, because here the extra pawn, I think, is almost meaningless. And instead, after d5, black would be needing to play the move c5, pushing past and getting the queen side majority going. And the important thing to understand here is that although white's d-pawn is going to be looking quite strong, it can always be blockaded with the dark square bishop on d8. And in the meantime, black's counterplay on the queen side is simply going to be too strong. So for example, d7, black can already play c4 here, with the idea that if white promotes, we're giving up our bishop, but immediately winning back the bishop on b3. And after the complications, rook takes b3, black emerges with 2 pawns up on the queen side and totally winning endgame. Now, the idea is not that you should be able to just calculate all of that once you play rook to e2. Instead, the point is to kind of believe in your position and believe that you're going to have resources to win the game, provided you put your pieces on active squares and continue to make active decisions. Usually the resources will kind of present themselves. So yeah, after rook e2 and rook takes b2, d5, here's where black would need to find this key idea with c5, which I think is totally doable, especially once you've seen this video and are now familiar with the idea that you need to play aggressively in the endgame. It's very, very important, especially when you have 2 connected pass pawns or 2 possible connected pass pawns. These can be really, really strong. So instead we see rook to d8, which definitely isn't as good, because now, okay, we're going to be winning back 1 pawn, but it's not necessarily going to be enough to win the endgame. Here white really blows it with rook to b1, just going super, super passive. I think white had definitely some better options here, for example, just b3, but I think the easiest one would have been to play d5. And the point here is that after bishop takes b2, white can take on c6 and force a trade of rooks. And this is something I talked about at length in a previous video about opposite color bishops. And here it's pretty clear. The defender wants to trade rooks. Once the rooks come off, then it's going to be really, really hard to win, even with 1 extra pawn, sometimes with 2 extra pawns, because opposite color bishop endgames are just so drawish by nature. And yeah, after dc6, black can keep a healthy extra pawn here, but this position is going to be super, super drawish, because white is just going to be able to bring in the king and blockade on the light squares. So this was definitely, I think, the easiest way for white to hold the position. Instead, white goes super, super passive here with rook to b1. I'm not sure what happened with this move. Black goes rook takes d4, a4, And now rook b4, just another unfortunate miss. Once again, we got to go for the second rank. The second rank in many endgames with rooks on the board is often going to be a big target and full of weaknesses to attack. And here after rook d2 and bishop d4, I mean, it's really all over. Black is just going to be dominating the board. White is forced to defend here at some point with rook to f1, and yeah, black is just going to clean up on the queen side. Even here, actually, after bishop e4, black can even just take this pawn. And now with two clean extra pawns, this endgame definitely going to be a win for black. Though not even necessary to take the pawn. You could take with the bishop, you could play bishop d4. I think actually this would be a much more technical way of playing the game. First playing here, forcing white to defend this one, and then taking this pawn and getting two extra pawns with the rooks still on the board, where black can just advance the queen side and easily win the game. So yeah, rook to b4, and definitely not as active here. White goes b3, b5. White plays a5, definitely a mistake. As a defender, we should be trying to trade pawns as much as we can, not give the opponent more weaknesses to attack. And here black still is doing really well. Starts going after this a pawn, which is hard for white to protect. Rook d6, b4, f5, hitting the bishop. White plays rook to b3. And yeah, another unfortunate miss, bishop to d2. And to Kirk's credit, you know, on all of these moves that I'm calling mistakes, you know, he spent time on them. It was just a matter of missing stronger opportunities. Because both bishops are hanging, so the instinct should be get the bishop away from attack with tempo. Bishop d2 is a good move, but bishop d4 check, this would have been GG on the spot. White resigns, king is in check, bishop hanging, game over. In fact, this one would have also been winning as well, just bishop takes b4, where if white takes, we take on e4. The two pawns on the queen side are super strong, and in the rook endgame, black just wins very easily here. Or if white goes bishop takes c6, hoping to grab a pawn before trading bishops, then of course black throws in bishop c5 check, takes, and wins the game. So yeah, really unfortunate miss there with bishop to d2. White continues to defend. Black is still totally winning because all of white's queenside pawns are collapsing. And unfortunately, we don't end up winning. So let me take you guys to the critical moment. I mean, black does everything absolutely fine here. Now black pushes c3, which doesn't really spoil anything, but it doesn't quite feel right because, of course, black's main advantage here is these two really strong pawns on the queen side. And normally we want to keep them together. We want to keep them moving together so that they defend each other and they take a lot of squares away from the enemy pieces. In general, I don't think it's right to be just pushing one pawn only like black does with c3, although black is still totally winning here, but this does seem to be the start of black's problems in the end. Instead, I think it was better just to bring the bishop back. Bishop c5, bishop c3, and then start running b4, b3. And if you can get both pawns running unobstructed, then it's really just going to be game over. We get c3, rook a2, white stops the pawn. Bishop takes a5, well calculated here by black. If rook takes a5, then c2, and rook a1 is met with rook to d1 check, so white is not stopping the pawn. But white goes king to e2. And now white is threatening to take on a5, because after c2, rook to a1, white will be able to stop the pawn. And here black ends up panicking and blowing the game. And this is kind of what I meant earlier, like these problems started with this move c3, because now things are a little bit loose, and black needs to continue to play precisely to hold it together. So there was a couple different things that black could do here to win the game. I think the simplest would have been just to move the bishop out of attack, like bishop to b4, utilizing the fact that the c2 push is in fact very dangerous. So if white plays rook takes a6, then of course we're just trading, pushing c2, and the king can't stop the pawn. And if white plays bishop takes a6, then we just push c2 immediately, and the rook has to leave the defense of the bishop on a6. So if black just plays bishop b4 here, then, I mean, all three pawns are defended on the queen side. It's a very easy win from here. It was also possible just to play b4 and sacrifice the bishop, and these pawns would have been strong enough, though I don't think that was totally necessary. Again, I think the easiest would have been just to move the bishop back this way or even back this way, give white one pawn, but you keep your pawns connected, you keep the rooks on the board, black's king can continue to activate itself, and yeah, white can blockade these pawns, but is not going to be able to hold this endgame for very long. The king is coming in, bishop e3, the rook can swing in, and yeah, it's just, these two pawns on the queen side are just way too strong. What we get in the game is the very unfortunate move, rook to d2. And it's an understandable move. It seems like black is up so many pawns that now we should be able to trade rooks and win, but it's, yeah, just a miscalculation. Because after rook takes d2, c takes d2, bishop takes a6, all of a sudden white is now hitting this one. If this pawn pushes, white can take on d2 here. But really the real mistake here is that black went, I think, for the rook trade when it was really not necessary. Even if black could play a move like bishop to c3, and then white doesn't take here and plays like king d1, allowing black to play b4, even this endgame actually is very possibly just drawn. I mean, black will have some chances, but it'll be very difficult to break through against the blockade with the bishop on b3. So that's why you have to be really, really careful with these opposite color bishop endgames. If you add a pair of rooks on the board, then black is always winning with 2 extra pawns, kind of like this. You take the rooks off, you're often not winning the game. So you really just have to be super careful before trading rooks in this kind of endgame. And here is actually just totally trivial, as white is even able to win another pawn. So king g6, bishop takes, b5, h5, and yeah, the game was eventually drawn, as black simply just can't make any progress here. So yeah, sad game for Kirk, not winning, totally winning position, but hopefully a very, very instructive game. And yeah, I appreciate the submission very much, because I think this is the type of game that many players out there have had, myself included, where you just miss win after win. And every single time the win gets just like a little bit trickier, and for a lot of the winning variations we looked at in this video, it should be said that sometimes it just takes a little bit of aggression, a little bit of courage to make it happen and play those active moves out on the board. So I guess that's the main takeaway from this video. Sometimes to win a game, you really have to play aggressively and place your pieces as actively as you possibly can to actually win the game and end things. All right, guys, hopefully you found this video useful. Please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care.